because I'm so bought in to this story. I want to see where it takes me. How does it help me understand these people better?
Hi everyone, I'm Ben, host of the show, and today's episode is yet another conversation with the better Dr. Boyce, my wife Erin. She decided to join me to review Season 2 of HBO's drug-fueled coming-of-age series, Euphoria. And there's a lot we could talk about, from drugs to sex and everything else that scares most parents when they think about their kids actually doing it. Now, if you've listened to Erin and I before, you know that our conversations are often passionate and debate-like. And that's deliberate. Erin and I were married the day after we met. We were both high on heroin and in a bad place in our lives. A place where marrying a stranger who lived 5 states away and we had only just met didn't seem ridiculous. So clearly, we were in trouble before our marriage even started. But in the end, that actually turned out to be a good thing. Since our marriage didn't begin with that gooey, lovey-dovey, I want to be with you forever shit, we didn't have to suffer through the normal process of it going away a year or two later, like happens with most married people. The bad news was we had a ton of work to do. Like, everything. We had little in common, and we both had a life of prior baggage we brought into the relationship with us. All that to say, we built from scratch this sort of relationship because that's the best way to continue improving oneself as you go through life. There are 2 kinds of friends in this world. Those who will tell you there's a booger on your face, and those who won't. And nowadays, we live in a world where more and more people prefer friends that won't. There's a lot of reasons why that's happening right now, but regardless of how predictable it was, it's an awful thing culturally. It's a big part of the reason that conspiracy theories and fringe groups are gaining a weird hold on those that many of us never expected to fall prey to such nonsense. And when we try to talk to our people, many of us are finding that they too prefer the sort of friend that won't tell you when you're wrong, and that we're no longer friends if we choose to help them try to see what they're clearly missing. It's so energy consuming to navigate relationships when both parties aren't in agreement about how to handle boogers on faces. So usually those relationships just dry up and die. And we all become more and more delusional as our inner circles support us no matter what, or risk joining those that we already defriended. So Erin and I built the sort of relationship where we just talk about shit and get it out there. And that's a big part of why we're so helpful to each other when doing things like critical research. We press each other to see things from another angle, to question whether there's more to the story, or to consider whether we might be entirely wrong about things that we both feel passionately that we're right about. It's super beneficial, and I'm privileged to have it. I know I wouldn't be where I am without it. In this episode, we're going to talk about stereotypes of drug dealers and how they're problematic, addiction and how they got some of it right and some of it wrong, Nate's journey along with other character arcs. We talk about a lot more too, and we spoil the story. So if you haven't finished Season 2 yet, and you don't want to know how it ends, watch it first, and then come back and listen to us deconstruct it later on. With that, I give you Dr. Erin Boyce. Cool, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So we thought today would be a good day to talk about the recently ended, somehow already recently ended, Euphoria season. We actually planned to do this episode, 2 weeks ago, and it was already Sunday, so we waited for that episode that day to air, because it airs weekly on HBO. HBO Max, I think, is what we watch it on. And it was a 2-part, so we realized, well, we better wait for the other part to air, because they left it kind of on a cliffhanger that instigated all sorts of fun tweets from people that I follow. One who said if they harm one hair on Fez's head, they're canceling HBO Max, never watching Sopranos again or something like that.
Sopranos.
Yeah, right.
It's Fezco, not just Fez.
Fezco, eh? We're going to talk about them today. This is a spoiler alert episode. If you still haven't finished the season of Euphoria, Season 2, you will learn a lot about it today, because we're going to talk about, just like we did last season, although last season you didn't come on and do this episode with me. last season I did a review and it got a lot of comments from people that listened to it and enjoyed it. So I'm sure I'll share some audio as we're talking through this. I'll interrupt and add some voiceovers that sort of make the points we're making. But to remind everybody, the first review I did was after the 2-part special. During COVID, there was a big pause in all sorts of productions. So they did a 2-part special where they only had a few characters show up and shoot these really long scenes. One of them was Rue.
Yeah, the first mid episode was focused just on Rue. She was with her sponsor in that diner, was pretty much the whole episode. And then the second one focused on Jules and what kind of went on for her during that time period.
And they were both infuriating. It seemed to happen a lot in the first season. So we both got worked up and talked about all the problematic depictions, not only of drug use and drug users, but also of recovery, of how it has to fit a certain model or it doesn't count. But it actually seems like this season they've backed off a little bit on the more problematic aspects of showing incredibly gratuitous and drawn out scenes of people that are shown to be minors in sexually compromising or sexual positions with grown adults, filming it, stuff like that. They backed off. So maybe that's a good place to start, because it feels to me like they maybe switched a couple of the staff members up this year, or hired some new people, or brought on some communication folks to explain to them what had pissed me off. I'll mention some of these when we get to this part, but I'm also pretty sure they listen to this episode. So what's up, producers? I appreciate you taking my advice on the last episode. In fact, maybe that is a good place to start, because it happened so much within a few episodes that you and I started to write it down. Well, we started to talk about it. I wrote it down. Where's my list? Well, number one, in the last 3 episodes before the end of the season, they were making fun of a cliche phrase. You gotta love yourself. What does that even mean? What a dumb phrase. Now, if you've listened to my podcast for any amount of time, you know that's how I end most episodes. Love yourselves and the addicted people in your life. And I've talked about why I choose that phrase and how love yourself is one of those things people always say, but you don't ever stop to think about it. And a lot of us that end up in prison or addicted don't have that love of ourselves, but we don't really realize it. But say you listen to a critique of your show and you didn't really like this guy critiquing your show, you might be prone to throw a little jab at him in the scripts. On top of that, I talked about the problematic drug dealer depictions. Mouse was a Latino, hyper-violent, gang-related man with tattoos on his face who forced the innocent young feminine girl to take fentanyl during her recovery, and he was a threat through the whole first season. So 5 seconds into this season, what happened to Mouse?
Mouse is killed in that first episode by another drug dealer who we see is a child struggling to come to his identity. So he kind of embodies this new, unpredictable, scary person we should really be afraid of, because he's so unpredictable. And that's clear, and really got a lot more airtime this season, right? I'm talking about Ash. Yeah. And yet that's always couched and juxtaposed, I guess, against Fezco, who is a drug dealer, but is the most loving, caring, parental. Like, he just has this way about him that puts you at ease. Until his masculinity comes out. And then the party happens, right? And you're like, you had this Fezco the whole time that is not that, right? That he goes out of his way to avoid the violence. Yeah. He really works to avoid violence. He doesn't like it, I think. And then yet, at some point, he feels like he has to step up and protect somebody. And the way he does that is with this extreme act of violence, like nearly killing somebody, and not having any thought that he's doing that in front of a room full of people. Yeah. Like, you're going to get caught. And yet still, he doesn't get caught. Right. And
he may have. We'll find out.
If you are all the way at the end of the season, you're thinking, is that actually true? But that's what we're getting in the beginning. And plus, watching his relationship develop with Lexi was something I really enjoyed. Yeah. I even said to you last week when we were watching that final episode, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's you and I'm her. I saw these pieces of their relationship growing and blooming that felt very much like how we got to where we are, right? So I'm seeing this really, really kind of beautiful relationship that is more of a friendship developed between these two. And it's something that they both really need. And it's just, it's been a beautiful thing to watch unfold.
You brought up the violent scene where suddenly this guy who's always real chill and he talks in that like nice syrupy tone and he always calms you down if like you're struggling. So just like be cool, man. That's Fez, right? As viewers, I saw this as Bell Hooks screenwriting 101, so I'm wondering what your thoughts were on why was that the situation where we put up with him totally breaking character and enforcing hyper-violent, masculine, patriarchal domination on somebody. I'm sort of tipping my hand, but what did you see there? Why did you do it then?
I think what I was seeing was an extension of that parentification that he has. Not that I like the violence, but I think that it was very pointed violence, right? It wasn't like he just, walking into the party and he bumped his shoulder and then there was this stupid, masculine, how dare you, back and forth. His violence was very intentional for a very specific reason, and that was protecting the people that he cared about. And it's very different from the other, like where Ash in that last episode is like something's wrong and it just responds. I
always bring you on here and then tell you you're wrong.
Yeah, but I'm not.
You're not wrong. But let me spice this and add that you're right. They're very different murders. There is some similarities. One is like they're both really unprovoked from the point of view of right now. Mouse is like he doesn't say a word. I don't even think they called him. I saw him in a few podcasts over the break, and he was talking kind of distracted and annoyed about the show, and I didn't quite put together. I think he didn't even get to come film that scene. Both of those violent attacks, both unprovoked, were masculine, hyper-masculine violence enacted in the defense of femininity, of proper white femininity, if you're going to use like the way Bell Hooks would talk about it. This high schooler who's like, getting off of drugs and doing the right thing and putting her life back together is infringed upon by this monstrous Latino man with tattoos on his face, and he stuffs fentanyl down her throat. Oh my God. That guy had to die. And the other guys had Nate. Nate is who we're talking about. Yes. So Nate has done all sorts of awful stuff in the first season. And this is one more point I mentioned earlier. It feels to me like they've either hired some different writers or they're taking a different long-term approach. Some different images and still create the affect, the glittery, foggy, steamy. I saw the same thing when he attacked Nate. When Fezco attacked Nate, it was in the defense of femininity because this guy had been going around and getting at Jules, who is a transgender character woman who has been like hypersexualized the whole show and been shown to be very good at performing what we think of as traditional femininity. Whereas last season, there were like some really brutal scenes where that was some of the sexualization of kids. So I'm going back to my Bell Hooks, but something she brought up a lot is one of the things, I remember it because I'm so annoyed and like traumatized by violence in my life, but that masculinity has built into it this ability to, at the drop of a fucking dime, duke it out with whoever the nearest fucking stranger is if they do the right thing, if they say the wrong thing, if they, whatever it happens to be. And my God, if those people threaten my women, patriarchal domination, I'm going to go fuck somebody up. And I think that's, as viewers, that's why we put up with it. Why we were all like, well, yeah, but there couldn't be a nicer guy to give out a beating like that. And there couldn't be an awfuler guy to take one than Nate, right?
And Nate's character arc this season has been interesting. I think that's one of the things that we did see change. That last season, it was really a show very focused on Rue and her experience, right? It was very much told through her eyes and what she was seeing. And while we're getting pieces of that this season, right, where we talked about they're breaking the fourth wall with her and allowing her to speak directly to the audience in some episodes, but that they've really begun to broaden and open up other characters in this show. And now, again, where Nate last season was this horrible monster, like you said. And now we're seeing something in him that was like, oh, wait, he's a human being. He has feelings. Oh, wait. And then there's this overarching, oh, was he abused by his father as a young boy? Or is this all in his imagination? So there's these things that are happening with him that have made him human, right? Where now I look at him and I don't necessarily look and say monster. I say, oh my gosh, you are the culmination of all of these life experiences and these people who have raised you to be the person that you are. And how can I be angry at you, particularly as you're beginning to recognize that and feeling the weight of who you are? I mean, it's just, like I said, it's been interesting that they've done this, and where you've said, you know, they've done away with some of the gratuitous sex. There still are some sex scenes where I'm like, I'm watching kids have sex. This doesn't feel right. You know, and so I've said that there's some of that just, it feels a little uncomfortable to watch. But what they've done with that in some of these scenes, the scene where Kat begins hallucinating, and then she has that body image scene. It's like a 2-minute music montage where she's dealing with her body image issues. And I mean, some of those things were just like so powerful. Like whoever did this did a really good job. And so it makes it hard to turn away from. Like you want to see what's next, because now I'm falling in love with all of the characters, not just Rue.
Last year, I'd also complained about the depiction of the Latino drug dealer who's murdered 5 seconds into the new season. Like, they were like, just get rid of him. But specifically, I complained about the use of tattoos on his face as a way to sort of... The point of this character is to make us, the viewers, know the second we see this cat, like, bad news. He didn't have to say a word. And then he, you know, reiterates every time he speaks. Because he also had one of those, like, real dark voices that just talks like he's coming after you, right? And now they built the character from start to finish. They replaced him, for lack of a better term, with a drug dealer who's he hasn't said if he's white or not, but he comes across as like just a normal white skater kid who's got some money and sells drugs, and he's got a tattoo on his face. So it's almost like they were like, oh, you're going to complain about a tattoo face Latino selling drugs. Maybe we can have this cat who sells drugs from the rich part of town. And he's safe, and he's a good friend, and he even at one point has, you know, that intervention, which we think is a good thing for Rue.
Okay. For a second, I actually thought you were talking about the other new character that is the boyfriend of the girl who's now living with Fezco and Ash. Remember, they moved her into the house, and she was living there the whole season with them. So that's who I thought you were talking about, was that new character, who's clearly a drug dealer and is engaged in all of this drug activity, which is a whole nother thing, that woman that tries to kidnap Rue.
Like, I feel like we could break this season into the bad and the good, because honestly, we did see some things that we both appreciated from our experience that they went out of their way to get right. But on the bad, since we've started there, there's a number of new drug dealers this season, because drugs kind of take a central role. And one of them is indeed this new high school kid with a tattoo on his face who is like the polar opposite of the monster that is Mouse. But there's yet another drug dealer. Talk about bizarro land. I don't know what they're doing with this plot line, and if they're just going to leave it out there hanging in the wind and never address it again. But Rue basically, as she's moving through the traditional Hollywood narrative of addiction, back on drugs, back off drugs, back on drugs, back off drugs. And when she's on them, she's out of control, 100 miles an hour, can't be stopped. And it includes a scene where she goes to this drug dealer when Fezco won't give her any money, and when none of her other drug dealers will serve her because they're friends that say, we don't want you to use drugs, so we'll show you what happens if we won't let you use them. You just go somewhere else and get them. And she goes to this other drug dealer, gives her a whole suitcase full of fentanyl, and we get to see the scene that most of us have seen like 200 times.
Elliot. This is who you're talking about?
Elliot's the white kid, right, that has a face tattoo, right?
I think he's Latino, but yes.
Okay. Well, he performs what you would think of as like traditional middle class suburbia pretty well.
Yeah, and I think he lives with his sister, so it appears that maybe something happened to his parents. There may have been some backstory that we missed through the season, but yeah, I don't know if you had noticed that there was a scene where he was sitting on the couch eating and watching TV, and someone came in and sat down, a much younger woman that I don't think could have possibly been a parent. And I think I got the impression it was a sister, so that maybe he lives with her and she's raised him. Well, so kind of what you might say an untraditional family, but they seem to have a really strong relationship. They seemed very like good with each other. Like he had a pretty stable.
So he's just one drug dealer, but with him, you're saying like, well, they didn't really make him that bad, except they did, because the second he got involved with Rue, we see that drug dealers have no morals, and they're best friend Jules, who Rue is dating, is now part of like this three-way triangle whereby the dealer's actually involved with both of them. And not like with Rue, he never really gets very far, but it's very clear that he likes her. And then him and Jules become involved because Jules is so jealous because she kind of knows what's going on that she starts making out with him whenever Rue leaves the room because Rue's on heroin, and they're drawing it as if when you're on high doses of opioids, your sexual drive is low. So she's just not interested. But what I see in that image, that's not far off, by the way, they did get that right, is drug dealers we know they're immoral, and they wouldn't think twice about just breaking up their good friendship with two people's relationship. It gets worse, though. The drug dealer that I'm alluding to, whose name we haven't found, but who basically gives, it doesn't matter because she's easy to identify. She hands Rue a suitcase full of fentanyl, and I'm pretty sure they're fentanyl patches, which is an interesting take because she's got some deal with a pharmaceutical company or something. That's a weird way for them to show fentanyl. They should have just had it in powder. Rue takes it home, basically the scene we've seen 100 times. Her mom finds it. And when she says, "Where's my fentanyl? I owe $10,000 or so, maybe more than that to this woman," her mom says it's all gone. We threw it away. And we get to see another image of a drug dealer, which is this woman comes and finds Rue, kidnaps her, changes her to a bed, presumably as a sex slave. And before anything terrible happens, because we as viewers aren't going to put up with Rue becoming a sex slave. That's not what we're here for with this show. She's the nice, innocent girl who's going to make it, right? She like jumps out a window and runs away, and then they just left that out there for a whole episode and never visited it again, as if a drug dealer, as if anybody is to the point where they would kidnap you and chain you to a bed is just going to let it go at that. What you see underneath all that is what we all feel like we already know. Drug dealers are monsters. Fuck with them and they'll kill you. There's some truth to one part of this story, which is like, if you're operating in any illegal world and people steal your shit and you can't call the police, what are you supposed to do? Of course, drug deals right now, because they're illegal, have more crime involved with them than other areas of commerce, because if I rob Rite Aid, they can call the police and the drug dealer can't. But to presume that we just bumped into a few drug dealers, 3 we've talked about this episode, and all 3 of them are awful human beings, some straight up monsters who needed their face smashed in with a hammer like Mouse. They're doing a hell of a job of showing us those same old stereotypical depictions of drug dealers.
Well, and you get that too, because if you remember, once Rue gets out of the house, jumps out the window and runs, she's standing on the side of the street and police pull up. And instead of being able to say, I was just kidnapped and ran from the woman who kidnapped me, because she's high, she runs because she knows that actually she's going to be the one punished in this situation if she asks for help. I mean, that's a pretty intense scene where she runs from the police and she's running for a long frickin' time, and then ends up going, if I remember right, to Fezco, and who, again, in this like, man, I've got so many things to do and so many people to protect, and how much, he cares for her, but he even ends up putting her out. Yeah. Right. So now we're seeing what this kind of movement in Rue's story to all the people who society would say have enabled her behavior to taking this tough love perspective.
All of them.
And all of them. I mean, even her mom at the end, right? And it'll be interesting to see in the next season how, because a lot is left undone in this season. This being the end of the season, there's a lot left undone. Like she ran from that drug dealer. And I'm sorry, are we thinking that the $14,000 that Rue owes her is just going to go away because she ran away?
I mean, the plot anyway. I mean, the whole thing was ridiculous.
And then the mom at the very end being like, you know what? I'm just going to focus on your sister, and you do you. If you kill yourself, you kill yourself. And it's, and I'm wondering what this tough love perspective is going to take, because it wasn't like, so you need to get the fuck out of my house and I don't ever want to talk to you again. It's more like, yeah, I mean, you're here, you're at home, you can live here, but if that's what you're going to do is kill yourself, there's just not much else I can do. And so it is a little bit of a different take, I think, on some of the tough love, like we were just going to push you out on the street.
We'll see. Let's get to that. Before we get there, final drug dealer that we've hit on and talked about how awesome he is, because he makes me feel all warm and buttery inside, and he talks all cool, and you just want to hang out with him. They're also, if you're looking close, showing you the monster of all monsters. Even if the person that you're buying drugs from is so awesome that they will take care of you and protect you, right beneath the surface, even if it's his little minion in the background, you better believe these motherfuckers will whack your face off with a hammer. That's what drug dealers are in Hollywoodville. And they are tricking you by showing you, look, even when the drug dealer's nice and friendly, they're not nice and friendly.
Right.
But I like this switch. So we're moving.
But yet
go
there's
ahead.
the redemption, right? At the end between Ash and Fezco, through all of these things
They're
that
murdering
happen in
cops.
Fezco
They're murdering cops. For each other. Yeah, they're monsters. They're drug dealers.
Fezco doesn't shoot anybody. He never has a gun in his hand. Ash grabs the guns and runs to the bathroom and locks himself in. And Fezco's getting him to come out. His little brother, I don't think they're actually biologically related, but they're family.
Tell me more about him. Have they met each other a couple times? Are they close to each other?
Raising him.
Does he look up the guy that's been raising him? So what's the kid he's been raising like generally? I think it's a clever trick. They did make it look like, well, at least he loves his brother. Did he even think twice about murdering police officers? Did he have to? He couldn't be talked out of it. He's ready to go. They're not humans. Drug dealers.
He couldn't be talked out of it. I'm not saying there was redemption for Ash. I'm saying that the role of parent that has been taken on by Fezco in this particular show came out at that end where he was like, don't do this. I'll go to prison. Right. And so this trying to prevent the bloodshed that I think he knew was coming and yet wasn't able to, because in the end, he turned around. He got shot and was laying on the ground the whole time that gunfire was going on. He never engaged the police back with any violence.
That's because they read the tweets and realized we need a way to have Fezco. Here's my guess.
And that's my thing. There's a redemption at the end of that. What
I'm saying is when you walk through the redemption, the way you have to describe it is forget about all the dead bodies in there that you just couldn't talk your little brother out of murdering. They're all dead. And you're on the verge of death. And your little brother's never coming back. And he offed himself for a pointless reason that's going to land everyone around him in prison. But the redemption is, at least Fezco was really hurt when his brother died. It's all so vague and frosting on the cakey that like right underneath it is dead bodies and murders and heartless moves to like, he's screaming, don't stab him. And he goes over and stabs somebody in the neck gratuitously. The whole thing is him and his little brother minion, who even though Fez is like so nice and he's still a monster. And his brother is a kid, for fuck's sake, a nice little white kid. He's a monster. When people sell drugs, they're monsters if it's Hollywood. I agree with what you're saying.
Redemption is the wrong word. Maybe redemption is not the right word for what I'm saying.
It's dialectical.
It's a following of his character arc that reinforces those ideas about him as not a monster, but a loving, caring person who is impacted by his circumstance more than his being. That
doesn't want his friends to die if he can prevent it anyway. So you're right. I mean, we didn't touch on dialectical tension, but when we were talking about Mouse at the beginning of the show, the season, just getting hammered before anybody says a word, that's only possible because we already fucking hate the guy. They've done their work. So when he dies, we just don't mind. And I think what you just saw with Fez was the dialectical tension pushing back. They're going to bring him back next semester or next season. They need him to be heartbroken, fighting from jail, dealing with shit going on around. And like, that's a really good way to do it, is to let us know he just was powerless. And so you're right. It does sort of play this weird redemptive trick. All right. So what'd they get wrong? You were talking about parents and family already. Geez, tough love. There's a scene that ends one of the final episodes with a mom on the phone screaming at an insurance company saying, my daughter's going to die if you don't give me some help right now. And her daughter, who she's talking about, laying one room over, listening to it all, trying to go to sleep and detoxing, which was like, I understand the writing in of the drama, but we talked about this. It seemed like what a great opportunity for somebody to just bump into her at work and say, have you heard of methadone? Because they built a whole episode and a half around the torment that is detox and how Rue's going through this thing that's so bad, her mom knows she's not going to be able to make it. She's going to have to go get some drugs. And if she gets drugs, she's going to die. That's what she means to insurance. If you don't help me, methadone's like $100 a week and you can get somebody in the next morning, and they're acting like the insurance people didn't know. No doctors knew. Nobody knew about Suboxone. Why do these TV shows that deal with drug use continue to go out of their way to not just take the soft pitch that's right in front of them and just say methadone, say Suboxone? You've got millions of people watching your TV show.
There is that, right? But again, the drama is the thing that is more important. and to portray a desperation that parents feel in situations like this. And I don't think that that's wrong, even coming from a sense and, as a social worker, knowing that getting a bed for treatment is really hard. There's wait lists, there's, insurance. So I think that the feeling of that and the possible desperation of that was real. But as you said, there are stopgaps that exist, right? That, okay, you have to wait 30 days for a bed. Is there a methadone treatment that we could get you on? Or can we get you in, to emergency for a quick detox and then, other supports? It sounded like within that conversation that they were offering an outpatient treatment, and the mom was like, no, she needs inpatient.
She doesn't need it. Inpatient. That's what I'm saying. We fell for it.
So it's, I don't know that I fell for it. No, I'm just saying I think that there's a reality within that desperation, and that our systems really are fucked up, and access to treatment can be really hard to get.
Opioid addicted people don't need inpatient treatment 99.9% of the time. It's like it's one of the few drugs that you can, even if you just cold turkey, is a silly term. Even if you just stopped, you're not going to die. You're not going to, it's very rare you even have anything like a seizure. But what I'm saying is it would have been a great point in the script to be like, ma'am, well, I don't know what you're so upset about, but the inpatient is fine. If you really think she needs to go, let's just get her well until she decides to go. If you need to go to inpatient, it's probably something psychological in addition to the addiction. You can take methadone for the rest of your fucking life, or Suboxone even while you're pregnant, and you're not going to be high and you're not going to be sick. I get what you're saying. It's a dramatic moment. And I'm always like wondering why they don't have scriptwriters that just went out of their way to do the same drama building in solution, right? Even if it's early in the next episode. And they're like, luckily the next morning we found something called a Suboxone clinic up the road, and we realized, holy shit, Rue's not sick. Crisis averted, the bandage is on, let's play this by ear, and maybe we'll send her to inpatient. But when she's well, she might figure out what she needs. Not only that, they've leaned the whole time on outpatient 12-step as the only answer. Even so much that when she started to, quote, relapse and go off the cliff, she burned the bridge with her sponsor, deliberately set him off. They made him look like a complete ass because, as we all know, in Hollywood, all drug users are fucking pieces of shit. Even if they're working on it, it's apt to pop out, and he's going to call her a bad name soon enough. They've been acting like her thing is 12-step. It works for her. Why is it that when she's addicted, suddenly the whole thing is like, well, first she has to go to inpatient for whatever. And then to really cap this, like, it went away. The next episode, they were like, oh, the detox, gone. Everything's fine. We're going to a play. It's cool. What the hell is this?
Listen to this, and maybe that's where part of season 3 will go, right? That we were shown that AA doesn't work in the first season, and that the traditional rehab is not always the answer in the second season, and that detox is really shitty. And so maybe in season 3, we'll see more of these really important solutions, harm reduction, and maybe they can and will introduce more of these ideas into the story. Because I think that, again, how popular the show is, like yours, and I think this is part of, and I don't know, maybe I'm speaking for you and not fully representing you well. And if that's true, let me know. But this idea that when you have a show like this, that you have such a large platform that you have to think how to keep people in, but then how can you use it to really change hearts and minds? Like you're saying, they're falling into so many of these tropes of these monsters, and yet they're good at this dialectic tension, as you talk about, that even when they're monsters, they're human beings, right? Like even Ash is this monster, but every time I look at him, I see the 12-year-old boy that he is, and I can't see a monster. I'm like, you're 12.
That's what you're trying to get at. And like, they all have good hearts. They've just been programmed wrong, which maybe that would have been a better way to interject and be like, I get what you mean by redemption. I think what you mean is like, somebody misprogrammed these little fuckers because they're great guys. Even their voices, they both talk cool, right?
So it'll be interesting to see where they go with another season and how they further kind of develop these ideas. And if we are watching something that is just going to continue to play into the tropes, or if they take the opportunity to really broaden a conversation about drug use. I mean, that's one of the things I'll say about Rue that's been interesting through this, is that as much as everyone talks about getting clean, she's like, I just don't want to, but I can't find the people to support me. And she's a functioning drug addict.
Right.
You're not seeing Rue not going to school or not getting out of bed, or, you know what I mean? Like, she was stuck in bed when she was detoxing. When she was using, she was good.
A lot of us are.
And so you're getting a sense of, wait, somebody can be a functioning drug addict. And yet we still say, but it's so problematic that you're a drug addict. And so, or
even just a functioning user.
They have a huge opportunity, I guess, is my point. And I wonder where they go with it.
So as we're moving into that, because you're talking about two things here, but they go really well together and they're written down and where we're headed next. So good for you. You're pulling us right into these notes were well put together. What did they get right? So I'm a heroin addicted person, mainlined cocaine for years, had a benzodiazepine, like heavy doses of Xanax addiction for a couple of years. Geez, always drank, still do, smoke a ton of weed. I'm like the drug user of drug users, so I have a good firsthand perspective, but I seldom spend the time that I'm high staring in the mirror. And you have a really good perspective of living your adult life, looking at me, seeing something very similar to what they were trying to show us on our couch watching Rue. Did you see anything that you went, whoa, that was on point? You want to see what I wrote down so you can cheat?
No, I don't need to cheat. I'm guessing the yawn is the thing that you're part of what you're going at. And
the detox yawn is what she's talking about. When you're detoxing from opioids, there is a yawn that is a exhausted, don't know why I'm yawning. You don't see it any other time and it just keeps showing up. But they managed to catch the gist of what it was repeatedly in a couple scenes.
I mean, I think the truth is that in a lot of ways I was both ignorant of and protected from some of the things that come along with drug use when it comes to you. I mean, I think you were using at an extent that I really didn't understand or know. And you pretty much were, like, again, functioning most of the time, right? There were definitely nights where it was just like you were just completely not there. And those were kind of, the nodding off and the sleepwalking and things like that. But it was like when you were ready to stop using heroin, we went directly into the methadone program. And so I never had to really experience detox with you. So I don't know, when I watched that, I don't know that I felt connected in a way, like even connecting with the sister or the mom and watching that and feeling, because I don't think, I never watched you actually detox. I've never seen it personally. So
I hadn't thought of that. That's really cool. You never had to, because you're right. I got most of that. That's how I went through every time we ran out of dope. And then once we got married, I wonder who even told me about methadone. Because it seems weird now in hindsight that I detoxed so many times. And some other things that they got right. And here's where, so on both fronts, the detox, which we can finish. Oh my God, exhaustion along with the yawning. Like you're just so worn out all the time. And Rue would talk about it from the kitchen when she was trying to cook food, just like, I can't even move. That is part of that. But also like candy. You just want candy so much. Not so much because of the sugar. I'm sure that's part of it because it's hard to eat and be hungry, but because it's a reward. And it's one of the few things that you can take that actually fires the same circuitry in your brain when it is shut the fuck down and screaming for heroin. That feeling of helplessness too. They've gotten some things right on a positive tip representing drug use, though, that I think we also both noticed about people that are using drugs. And I'm thinking about this scene in the back with Rue in the back seat of a car and Fezco and Ashtray in the front. And it ends with Fezco literally saying something like, yo, shut the fuck up, man. You are irritating as fuck right now. And she's rapping and she's singing along to a Tupac song, and everybody that watched that lived in the 90s put themselves in the back seat. That one time when their friend was driving and was the designated driver and pissed off, but on point, right? Yeah. And they did this a few times. She rode a bike high on heroin once. What I wrote in my notes was she was passing a lot, which is something in Hollywood. I got to give them kudos for this move. Last year, they weren't quite as good. Is that when you're on, especially drugs like heroin on daily doses, you tend to do exactly what you just said a minute ago. It's just your life. You're in the normal come and go. And it's when you take doses that are so much that they become obvious that people start to notice, and you're gonna have to change something pretty quick if you're falling off your bike. But heroin in Hollywood is like, you'd never get on a bicycle. My drug dealer in the book I just released, that's where he shows up riding a bike. 90% of the times we met, he would show up on a bike because he would just kind of be invisible compared to somebody in a car when he's on the bike. And he never crashed. But we have images of like, well, when you're on drugs, your life just ends and becomes dull and stupid and you can't think or do anything. Like, I don't know about that. I go play some basketball or read a book.
I think one of the things that from my own lived experience that says something to me, and maybe this is why I feel like I do about Ash and Fezco, is that is particularly bringing Rue in, and even the way he took in, I think her name is Faye, which is the blonde girl that's living with them. There's a community there, right? When you're an outsider or when you're on the margins of society, that you develop communities. And I know in the episode that we did on methamphetamine use and meth, that I use meth. And that was one thing that I can always look back on my experience and say is that through all of that, no matter how shitty things got, there was always a community. Like I always had someone I could go to. I was never alone. And I think that's something that is being seen here, is that there's a community of people who really care about each other. And I think that's something that rang very true for me. Yeah, right.
I thought they captured that great, actually. Yeah.
And so that's something I think that felt really believable. And
they can do it. See? Yeah. There's like numerous things that they hit a home run on. I was like, well, they didn't have to do that.
Well, but even Elliot, the new guy with the face tattoos that was Rue's friend and has caused all of this trouble, is a very well-functioning drug addict. Right. This is someone who uses drugs sometimes with Rue, sometimes by himself, and he's still writing music, he's still going to school, these are people that are living their lives despite this other thing that's going on. And it really feels like it's the people around them that are making it a problem as opposed to them making it a problem. And how are they going to work that out in the next season is, I think it's something that they're doing, and I don't know, I would hope it's intentional and they know what they're doing, but I wonder sometimes if they do, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, some of it, clearly. This last episode, which maybe that's worth talking about briefly, the double part episode where they totally smashed the fourth wall and did this. I'm telling you, I would seldom recommend that somebody watch the end of a show before the beginning, but the last two episodes of season 2 were so incredible.
Genius.
But and it was representations of these high schoolers who are already themselves representations being played by one of their own on stage and reflecting back to them in the crowd as it all reflects back to us back at home. And we're like, damn, and it was brutal because they had to look at themselves, but we also had to look at the screen and go, this is what I'm spending my Sunday night doing. We learn when we watch TV. That's why we turn our TVs on. Yes, it's entertainment and escape, but you cannot help but learn. That must be what high schoolers are like nowadays. See what she just did with her phone? That must be something that kids do nowadays. You can't walk away and not learn something, right?
Just the way they did it in combining it with some flashback scenes as they're telling the story. So you're watching the characters on the stage play these scenes. So, Rue giving the speech at her father's funeral in the red hoodie, and you're watching her, and then they switch camera angles, and all of a sudden you're watching another character that looks like her on stage playing her and watching that play out. And so it was almost like you got to watch the whole show again. And again, this is what I was saying before, that season 1 was all from Rue's perspective. And so what they really did was introduce us to Lexi, let us meet her, and then view the entire story again through a different lens. I was like, that's just genius, because I'm so bought in to this story. I want to see where it takes me. How does it help me understand these people better? And yet a lot of what I'm seeing are parts of the story I've already seen, but because I'm seeing them from another point of view, this was a really good season.
Speaking of, we've said a couple things about out of character behavior, Fezco assaulting somebody and beating him with a image of his life. Oddly, Leslie, what's her name? Lexi wrote this play, and Lexi is every bit as friendly as Fezco. She's the nice, quiet girl in the family. And once the play starts, something happens and she turns into an asshole. And they don't follow this up. They just have her repeatedly say things like, You tell that Gary, the light guy, that if he doesn't get those lights right, he's fucking fired and he'll never work in the industry again. And Gary's like a volunteer 12th or 10th grader that's like, who's going to run the lights if you fire me? And I was saying, like, since they're playing with this idea of like a high school play showing the shown to the viewers, my guess is one of the people they switched out during the off season was somebody who acted an awful lot like that towards the staff. It was pretty clever.
One thing just really quickly that we moved to kind of to something else that was on your list that we didn't really go completely into that I think is something important to mention with this show is in talking about family. And we were really talking about Rue's mom and thinking about this tough love perspective. And I mean, really what you're seeing are a lot of very dysfunctional families operating, right? In a lot of ways. I mean, we've yet to see anyone with what might be called a stable home life, with the exception of Jules. Like Jules and her dad are...
Which is kind of clever, actually.
Right. He seems really awesome. And like they have a really good relationship. They're very honest with each other. They rely on each other. And so you're not getting just bad family looks, right. But really that's something too, I think. I wish they would do something more with that, right? Because with Lexi and Cassie's mom, so Lexi that wrote the play, Cassie the blonde, like their mom clearly drinks a whole lot. She tends to be more of a friend than a parent, right? You get that. The dad left, so she's been a single mom all this time. And yet, even watching Lexi's play, even when she was being made fun of, she was just so into it.
Good-hearted,
so she's really this amazing person, and yet we're always given this look like she just doesn't have it together, like she's just a mess. You know, I mean, even I said when, you know, she saw Cassie walking by to walk up on stage, I was like, you need to get her, right? I'm like, that's your kid, you need to get her right now. And I'm like, but that's not really her character. And so I'm wondering how they can think about these characters as parents and not just that parents are just these like fucked up things that do nothing but fuck up their kids. Like how can these character arcs change so that we can begin to love these characters too, right? Like with Nate's dad, you're like, you are just a piece of shit, you know, that's done this. And then the mom who clearly Liz just like sat back and let it all happen to their whole lives and is just drinks a lot and is not really present. So I don't know. It's just how could they do this with the parental arcs and creating an under?
Nailed it.
And I think there's families like that. I don't think they're wrong.
So when
but
we both
it's just
grew
like
up,
all of them being that bad.
We both grew up in what you'd consider like hyper-religious houses. For those that don't grow up in that world, there's things that like you can see from afar and kind of get, but you don't really grasp how we think about those things. And one of them that I found people don't quite understand unless they grew up in it is the fear of the world that is not identifying as the same religion as you, because you don't just see them as a different religion, you see them as bad. And it isn't just religion if it's a deal breaker. So in most Christian religions still, homosexuality and any kind of non-straight heteroconforming behavior is like, oh, that's a no-no. And drug use and even alcohol and smoking cigarettes are a no-no. And they all get grouped in there, which means as a Christian kid, when you walk into a house of somebody that's smoking a cigarette or drinking a beer, a lot of times you get freaked out and judgy as fuck because you don't know what these feelings are and you just know something scary. And I've noticed that this is sort of an American thing. It's more than just religion. That's been a common theme in Hollywood for a while to use. There's this common video, Before They Lock My Love Away. Is that what it's called?
That sounds right.
I don't know if I'm allowed to sing,
Taraji P. Henson video.
Yeah, and she smokes at the end of it as a sign. As viewers, we see that happen, and we know in that moment that she's actually been fooling us the whole time, and she's the bad guy. Because Hollywood, long ago, realized you can associate substance use with badness, wickedness, evilness. And I've wondered if they've done that with her from the get, and now what they're trying to do is cap that and say, it's not so much bad, it's just different. But the difference comes across unless you get depth, unless you sit down and get to know the person, is bad. Because as the person that runs a show called Dr. Junkie and teaches college kids and goes into prisons, that skeleton, if I stop there, people can be like, Dr. Junkie, oh yeah, it's a show about how the drug war should go away and we should make drugs legal. I've just made it worse. Like, unless you really get to my heart and they're like, why are you doing that? You're like, fuck this guy. But then you find out, oh, it's to get people to use less drugs and to use them safer and to, get rid of the packed prisons and all this other stuff. So I wonder if that is in fact what they're doing when they're reshaping her mom. Because it seems like those parents sometimes are a bit more fun involved. My dad loved beer growing up, and man, we had some fun times.
Well, and I mean, and that's, again, one of the things that makes me think about is the relationship that she does have with her daughters, right? That although we as outsiders might be like, oh, you are not taking control, and oh, you drink too much, and oh, like making all of these judgments, her girls go to her for everything. She knows where they are. She knows what they're doing. I mean, when Cassie is a wreck. Don't get me wrong, but even wasn't there something in season 1 where she was pregnant and mom like supported and took her to get the abortion? I mean, like they have a good relationship. Like we may not approve of the parenting because it doesn't look like parenting, like you said, in a classical sense, 2 parents, 2.4 kids, a white picket. Like it doesn't look like that, but she's not a bad mom, right? But we're quick to judge and say you're a horrible fucking mom because you don't look like June Cleaver.
Or because you get your kid's ex.
Yeah, and maybe June Cleaver's really antiquated here, but I'm thinking what about the middle, Frankie, right? Like she was the classic
what people
parent
think
with
about
struggle,
us.
or Roseanne, right? I'm a little shitty, but I'm still a really good mom. And yet they have taken that and really pushed it to its very edges. Yeah. How do you get people to see that same thing, that she's not just a horrible mom? And I mean, there was a scene with Nate and his mom after the dad left, where they sat down and she poured him a drink, and they were sitting there having a drink and talking, and she called him on his shit. And he got really angry for a minute, but then he kind of stopped and listened, right? And so it was like there was a real moment between the two of them where she's like, here, have a drink. You are so angry. I don't know why you're so angry. And so there are these relationships that develop between the parents, but yet we're just so inclined to see them as bad. We don't catch those moments of tenderness, of parenting, of compassion for one another and love for one another.
But you told the story before that kept going through my mind as you were talking, of our daughter being curious about MDMA. She's 10, 15 years ago now, and talking to her about it and saying, go study it. If you decide you want to take it, we'll talk. And then she went upstairs and we were like, well, fuck, we're going to have to get it for her. If you stop the story there and you don't like listen to us explain the obvious why and how that would work, you're like, you're those fucking parents, right? But the farther you go in the story, the more you realize, like, that is not a convenient decision. The convenient decision is to say, don't you dare say that to us, and don't be a bad student, and get your shit together, and then plug your ears and close your eyes and ignore when she comes home with her pupils all blown up. Follow through, be a good parent. It's the difference between hitting your kids, spanking them, and starting to figure out what made them act that way, and trying the first of 10 things to try to correct that behavior, and using positive and negative reinforcement. Right. It's so much easier in our country to be the parent that just hits, but often what appears on its face to be bad parent turns out to be good. There's
this first instinct that pulls at you to be judgmental. Like, why are you pouring your kid a whiskey? Right. But at the same time, again, thinking back to some of the things that we had done in raising our kids, and I can remember Vanessa talking about wanting, going to a party and drinking. And I was like, have a drink with me first, right? Like get a sense for how it's going to impact you, how you're going to feel, what are your limits? Like, I think it's a good idea. And so I got her some of my favorite. We got some Malibu rum, which is my favorite, with some pineapple juice. I don't know, maybe giving her a yummy drink for her first drink wasn't the best idea, but we poured a drink, we sat down, turned on a movie, and we hung out. And halfway through the movie, she was passed out. And she was like, what's the big deal? It just made me really tired and sleepy.
Romance, right?
Yeah. And it was like, at some other point, we had a couple of drinks and she woke up with a headache, and she's like, well, this isn't fun. And it was never, and again, anything we had to be majorly concerned with. She learned early kind of what are my limits. She's pushed them a few times, like we all have. But our kids have been responsible in how they drink and how they use drugs and what they do. And I think that that's something that we did well with our kids. But again, it was the not hiding it. Like, like people,
it wasn't easy.
Like pouring your kid a drink, when everybody else would be like, never in a million years, you have to wait until. How do we engage with our kids? And that, yes, despite all the dysfunction, that there is some really good parenting going on. And yet I don't know that those parents are getting the credit for that. I think at this point we are still supposed to hate them quite a bit.
No, I don't. So
I don't either. And so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm making assumptions about society that aren't entirely true anymore. Maybe we are turning some corners.
Yeah, but slowly but surely. Well, this was fun. I'm trying to think of when we should do it again before the next Euphoria. And you and I have been like writing a book together about simulation theory because, spoiler alert, we live in a simulation. So I don't know, maybe in a couple of weeks. It's so outside of the box of what this podcast is about. And yet, I could see it being kind of related, so maybe we should sit down and talk about simulation theory.
I will sit down and talk to you about simulation theory. Just remember that while it is fun, and really talking about this family, I am the probably most likely sci-fi nerd. Like, I watch a ton of sci-fi. I read sci-fi books. I am the sci-fi guru of this family. And while I find it fascinating, I'm still of this like, well, if it is, that's where I'm at, right? Yeah. It's kind of like it is what it is. And so I don't think if it's true or not, has no impact, I think, on how I live my life, but I find it fascinating.
All right, but let me, so this will be a good think bomb for people to take away, and maybe even you. There's a possibility that right now you and I aren't talking, but that rather somebody pushed the start button on, I want to sit in on the conversation they had in 2022 where they recorded that podcast on the Dr. Junkie show about Euphoria season 2, and I want to experience it. And we've already been put into the matrix or the metaverse, and would we know the difference? I mean, that's exactly what goes on in our brains anyway. Stuff happens. We have no idea why the fuck we do it, but we always have a story ready to go to lie to ourselves why we did it, and it's never the right answer. But we're always like, the reason I turned on this channel instead of that one is because I saw Chips yesterday and I didn't want to watch it again. But you could just as easy said it, I saw Chips yesterday and I did want to watch it again. The answer is always bullshit, but we're designed to quickly have a fucking answer, almost as if somebody realized we better just wire these things up to not get to looking over there, because eventually they'll uncover that. So I don't know if it'd feel any different.
Many of these very human things that define who we are as human beings, the way we think, the way we have excuses, the way I go back to, they feel very human. And even if they are programming that drives us towards these decisions and these things, it still has to be based in some type of reality. So it has to actually be the truth of what human beings are, which still just makes me feel as much of a human being as if I am actually alive and living this right now, if I was alive and lived it in the past, or if I am just a player character. I don't know. Like, it still feels like what I'm experiencing is what the world is or would have been like. And so why it's fascinating. I'm like, but even with that knowledge, I would wake up tomorrow and my life would look very much the same as it did today. If that makes sense.
If you wake up tomorrow. Yeah, it does make sense. And so if this is something that you're like, hey, this is kind of interesting. This is hardly even a nibble of the different ideas and thoughts we've played with in the last couple of weeks. It seems like every day sometimes I bump into something else that I'm like, well, goddamn, there's another reason that it totally makes sense. The biggest one, and again, we'll shelf this, and I think it'll be a fun one to do, but is just imagine the things that you cannot learn until you've lived them, and how valuable it would be if you could figure out a way to teach people about love, death, sex, raising kids, how much you change and what you want to do with your life between one age and another, how long-term habits affect you in certain ways that are not at all like what you thought. What if you could give people that at 17 years old and send them on their way? Anyway, this was fun. We'll sit down and do it again, and thanks for coming on, Erin.
Thanks for having me.
Again, that's Dr. Erin Boyce, my wife and life partner. And this is the Dr. Junkie Show. As always, take some time to really think about what it means to love yourselves and the addicted people in your life, and then try to enact it. That's not just a cliche line with me. It's a small piece of my strategy for life. I'm Ben Boyce.
Oh, it is Ashtray. They just call him Ash, but his character name is Ashtray.
I knew it was Ashtray. I've been calling him Ashtray. Everybody was making fun of me. This week's show is brought to you by Weed Noodles. Weed Noodles. They're noodles made out of weed.
Just making stuff up.
This week's episode is brought to you by Clorox brand cocaine. It smells like bleach because it's made by Clorox. If you're still here, you might want more. So consider checking out my book, Dr. Junkie, one man's story of addiction and crime that will challenge everything you know about the war on drugs. You can get it wherever you buy books. If you want to know what the world would look like if drugs were legal, or why we develop tolerance and sensitization to drugs when we take them for extended periods, or if you just want to know why I went to prison, check out the book.